Welcome back. So in the last lesson, we covered an overview of RDS. And what we're going to do in this lesson is we're going to launch a couple of RDS instances. And we'll do something like this. We're going to create a master, a multi-AZ standby, and then a read replica. We won't actually have any application servers for this, but what I want to show you is how you actually launch the databases in these various configurations. And then when you have your own application, you can simply point it to the database using a connection string. So let's head over to the AWS Management Console. What we need to do is go to Services, scroll down to Database, and RDS is the first option here. In the main console here, let's choose Create Database. Now, what Amazon do by default is try to get you to use Amazon Aurora. But for this case, I'm just going to choose MySQL. Now, there's a few options here. You can choose a standard create or an easy create. If you go for the easy create, then it gives you a best practice configuration and there are fewer options to change. In this case, we'll just continue with the standard create. So we can choose the addition of our MySQL. I'm just going to leave that as the default. And then there's a few templates. So we can choose a production, a dev test, or a free tier option. Of course, the free tier option means that we'll be able to run this database for a period of time without actually paying for it. So we can select that one at this stage. I'm going to select free tier. And then we need to give it a database identifier. I'm just going to call this one Digital Cloud. We need to give it a master username. I'm actually just going to copy this, paste it in, and I'm going to paste the same for the passwords. Now here we get to choose the instance type. Now because I selected free tier, it's actually going to grey everything else out. So if you do that, you'll find that you won't be able to choose any other instance types. But I'm okay with that for now. So I'm just going to leave it on a db.t2.micro. So this is very similar to the T2 micro instance we used with EC2. It's just got a database running on it. You can then choose storage. And again, because this is running on EC2, you're going to see the same options that you see with EBS volumes, except that we've only got the SSD type. So we've got the general purpose SSD and the provisioned IOPS. I'm going to leave it on general purpose and I'm okay with the size. We can have auto scaling for our storage as well. So it will automatically scale the amount of storage we need. And there's a maximum threshold here. I'm just going to leave that as the defaults. Under availability and durability, we would have the option to select multi-AZ if it wasn't for the fact that we were using the free tier. Because we're using free tier, we're not able to do that at this stage, but we will do that soon. So the next thing is connectivity. I'm going to leave it in my VPC. I'm going to use password authentication for the database. And then we'll just come down to additional configuration. I'm going to call the initial database Digital Cloud. We can leave automated backups on. And if we just scroll down to the bottom here, I'm going to make sure that deletion protection isn't enabled because I do want to delete this one today. And everything else is default. Now, by the way, you'll notice here there's some information about maintenance. So there's a maintenance window and you can select the maintenance window. And this is when things like critical security patches will be applied. So there will be an outage period at that time if there's something that needs to take the database down for a reboot. I'll just leave that on no preference. And let's scroll down and click on Create Database. So that's it, the database is creating now and it can take a few minutes to initialize. So you might want to grab a cup of tea or coffee and then come back and in a few minutes it should be ready. So it's been a few minutes and now my database is actually available. So we can see the Digital Cloud database is in a state of available. Now at the top here, we've got this option to view credentials. So you can see this and what it will do is it will give you this information. So it gives you the username, gives you the password, and hopefully you'll set a more secure password than I did. And then it gives you the endpoint. So this is the endpoint ID that you would use for your application. Now after this, you can't see the password, but you can find the other information whenever you want to. You can come down here to endpoint and you can find this endpoint. So this is what your applications are going to use, and they can use this to read and write to the database. And the port is 3306, and that's because we used MySQL. So that's the standard port for MySQL. So in the console here, we've got a bit of information. It shows you some information about the performance. There's more detailed information on this tab as well. So you can see CPU, database connections, storage, memory, the write IOPS and the read IOPS on the database as well. So back on this main tab here, you can also see the availability zone that your database has been launched in. So it's in AP Southeast 2C for me. And you can see the security group rules down here as well. And you can see the security group that it's attached to. So it's important that when you set up your application to talk to RDS, you make sure that you edit the security groups so that your application is able to talk to the database on the correct port. So in this case, port 3306. So for example, you might want to go to this security group. Let's open it in another tab. Click on inbound rules and edit inbound rules. Now this is the one that's actually attached to the database itself. And what it does is it allows all traffic from itself. So from EC2 instances that are actually as part of this security group. So you've got a couple of options. You can add your EC2 instances to this security group, or you can create another security group and change this ID. And you might actually want to restrict it to the correct protocol as well. So if you search for MySQL, and it's the same for Aurora, you get port 3306. So you might want to remove the all traffic, use the MySQL Aurora port range for 3306, and then in here, add in the security group for your applications. So if my applications were in this security group, then that's what I would use. And that would now give them access from that security group. This is more secure than actually using a IP range because it restricts it to that particular security group. So I'm not going to change that. I'll just click on cancel. And back in the RDS management console, let's have a look a bit further. So we've got logs and events in here. We can see CloudWatch alarms if we've created any. And we can see some information on recent events that have happened, and then the logs at the bottom here. You've then got the configuration tab, which shows you the configuration that we currently have for this particular instance. And then we can look at maintenance and backups. So here you'll notice that the auto minor version upgrade is enabled. That just means that if there's minor updates to the database that aren't going to cause the database to be taken offline, they're going to happen automatically. Whereas other updates which will cause your database to go offline will happen during the maintenance window. And remember, you can choose that maintenance window. At this stage, there is no pending maintenance. What I want to do now is actually enable multi-AZ and create a read replica. Now you'll remember we used the free tier, so at this stage we're not able to launch multi-AZ. So I do have to make a couple of modifications. So I'm just going to choose modify. Let's get rid of this message at the top. And in here I'm going to select multi-AZ. So it is going to allow me to do this now. Let's just scroll down to the bottom and click on continue. And then on the screen, we actually have the option to apply this change immediately. So in this case, I do want to do that. And it's going to warn me that because it's going to create a new instance and replicate all the data from my database, that it's going to create a performance implication. So it could slow down your database. In this case, it doesn't matter. We don't have any data and this isn't a production database. So I'm going to click on multi-AZ. And by the way, you can see the summary of what's going to happen here. So it tells me that multi-AZ deployment is currently value no, and it will be value yes. So it's going to create a multi-AZ replica. So let's click on modify DB instance, and that's it. That's going to happen for us. So if we come back up to databases, we can now see that the status is modifying. So that's going to take a few minutes because it's got to launch that standby instance and then start replicating data to it. Now you'll notice there is no additional database here. So there's no separate connection string that you can see. The connection string for the master database actually gets failed over to the secondary database, the standby, in the event of a failure of the master, which means that your applications will then automatically connect to the standby when it becomes the new master. So as you can see, that was a really simple thing to do in order to enable disaster recovery for our database. And that's something pretty amazing about a managed service in the cloud, because if you were going to try and do that yourself, it's really quite complex to set up that kind of capability. Whereas in the cloud, it's super simple. It's a few clicks in the console or a few commands on the command line. Now I'll just pause recording again because this will take a few minutes to modify, and I've got to wait for this to finish modifying before I can create the read replica, which is the other thing I want to show you. So that took a few minutes, and we now have our database in the available state. So we have to be in the available state before we can make any other changes. So let's go into our digital cloud database. And if we just head down a little bit here, we can see replication. So now we can see that there's a DB instance called digital cloud in AP Southeast 2C, and that's going to be what we replicate to. So at the moment it doesn't tell me any state information, but that's going to update over time.